McWaters, you may begin.
All right, well, happy Friday to everyone out there. Again, my name is Mark McWaters, and I am the Director of Client Solutions here at the Work Institute. I'm certainly excited that you've decided to spend the next 30 minutes with us learning about the benefits of our research. We oftentimes get requests from organizations that are uncertain to the specifics of workforce research and what would that relationship look like with the Work Institute in order to meet their needs. Hence, we have put together a quick 30-minute webinar where we will walk through some of the benefits of our partnership and talk a little bit more about best practices within the workforce research space. As the operator mentioned, feel free to put your questions in the chat area, and as we go through the quick presentation, I'll make sure that your questions are answered. I will also put up my contact information here at the end of our call in order for those to follow up with me later if they do have additional questions. Well, let's dive right in. So as far as what we'll be covering today, we're first going to summarize, is this important, referring to workforce research. I'll share some statistics with you that I think will further drive home the urgency behind the need of understanding the people side of your business. I'm also going to pose some rhetorical questions for you, things to get you thinking about how this will be relevant for your organization, before diving into telling you more about who the Work Institute is, what makes us different, and our approach to the research. Here we'll be discussing some of the best practices in workforce research, in addition to showing you our reporting system quickly and some examples of how you can look at the feedback that's collected from your workforce. Then at the end, we'll touch on taking action and ultimately how pricing and implementation works in a partnership with the Work Institute. As we start out, I really want you to focus on some of people at your organization and think about the various types of employees you have. And then also consider some of these statistics and some of these points that you see here on your screen. Think about your CFO. So what is the largest expense on his balance sheet? When he looks at his finances, what is the largest expense? Most of the time, that largest expense is the people. The people is the answer, and that expense is something that the CEO is constantly trying to manage properly. Now, the CFO will be looking at that on a daily basis. They're constantly looking at their numbers. Now think about your CHRO or your VP of HR or your Chief People Officer, and think about how often do they get the metrics they need to lead the people side of the business. We're going to spend some time walking through some of those here this afternoon, or for those of you on the West Coast, still this morning. Here's some quick stats for you. So shareholder return, 19% higher when employees are engaged. 29% of the workforce is engaged in the U.S. Now, these are coming from Dale Carnegie statistics. And 80% of employees are dissatisfied with their direct supervisor. Now, we all know direct supervisor is a huge driver in retention, and 4 out of 5 people are not satisfied with that direct supervisor. 89% of employers think that their people will leave for money, but when asked, only 12% of the employees cite money as their primary reason for leaving. Now, I'll let you marinate on that for a second. Now, think to yourself, do you think that compensation is your main issue? And if so, for those people who do think that way, only 12% of the time do their employees reflect that same thought. There's so much more to your employee retention and your employee engagement than money. So think about yourself again. So why are you considering workforce research? What do you need specifically to uncover about your employees? Think, where is this turnover occurring? Is it in a certain department, a certain supervisor, a certain facility? Where is that key pain point? What are you looking for in a research partner? There are a lot of avenues out there and a lot of different options for getting a third party to collect your information. So think to yourself, what's going to be really important in that partnership to you? How will you measure success, and ultimately, how do you currently monetize your turnover? If we want this research to speak to that CFO or to that CEO, then we need to talk about the business impact of what reducing turnover at your organization or increasing engagement at your organization is ultimately going to help on the bottom line. Now, who is the Work Institute? The Work Institute, we know, can be a broad name, and we get all types of speculative answers as to what people think we are, but I'm going to clarify some of those myths for you and talk a little bit about who we are as an organization. Now, we're headquartered here in Nashville, Tennessee, so if you hear any y'alls or a twang or southern drawl in my voice, please forgive me. But we've been around since 2000, and these middle bullet points are actually why people decide to partner with TWI. Anytime someone decides they're going to enter a partnership with us, my first question is, why the Work Institute? And this is what we hear most often. The first is we have a very research principle-driven approach. And what we mean by that is, rather than relying on gut instincts, we're letting the data lead decision-making here internally as well. And we're going to talk through some of those specific research principles in more detail here in just a minute. We also have an industry-leading reporting tool which makes this data available to you whenever and wherever you need it. The feedback is coming through in a system that we'll take a look at, that anytime you need updates on your feedback, they're available for you to reach. Now also, post-sale, we think one of the key differentiators of the Work Institute is the support on the back end. You have a dedicated client services director who is there to help you facilitate, implement, and analyze your research. We're much more than a vendor, a true partner helping you find success from your employee feedback. We also are going to help you look at your research through a financial lens, and then I'm going to show you some of the partnerships that we've had and continue to have over the years with many organizations which you'll recognize. Now, we get the question a lot too of, okay, well, what types of workforce research does the Work Institute collect? And the answer is there are many different kinds, but these are some of the pillars that we do most often, working throughout that entire employee life cycle. So it may be a recruitment type interview, potentially an offer decline study is a good example. Maybe you had 100 or 1,000 people that turned down jobs last year in a certain area, and you're not sure why that happened. A partner in the Work Institute can make those phone calls and uncover the actionable feedback that you're looking for. Maybe it's an onboarding assessment of, let's look at your onboarding process and what could be done differently and how could you improve. Or stay interviews. Stay interviews are the fastest growing part of the business. A lot of energy on how to keep your employees and what are those key factors that keep them at the organization. Risk interviews, compliance-oriented type conversations. So many organizations out there, especially in the healthcare arena or in very regulated compliance-specific type organizations, need this extreme focus. And so we do some compliance or vulnerability type studies with those organizations. Another thing to know about the Work Institute as well is we're a custom workforce research company. So special studies are something that we often do with our partners. What we mean by special study is that each organization is unique. You may have a different type of feedback that needs to be collected that hasn't been done before. Well, one of the advantages of the Work Institute is through applying these research principles, we can use those in your specific study and ultimately get you the actionable feedback you're looking for. Now, here's a sample of some of the partnerships that we've had and continue to have. The purpose of this slide is, rather than being a quote-unquote humble brag slide, we think this is important because there are many different types of industries represented here. You see everything from retail to automotive, finance, telecommunications, hospitality, engineering focus, manufacturing. The point of this is to show you that regardless of the type of industry or the type of employee, if you use the correct methodology, you can collect actionable feedback and drive change at your organization. And again, I'm going to spend some time here in just a minute talking through those specific research principles. To give you an example of a success story or a case study, if you will, that the Work Institute has completed, we're going to use this regional health services organization as a good example for you. They consistently have high turnover despite being located in a rural, isolated market. Their leadership came to us and told us that they needed to reduce that turnover and they needed to understand why their people were leaving. At the time, their turnover was roughly 21%, and we had calculated with the cost of the turnover for their people at the specific health services organization was $4 million annually. Now, when you talk to your CFO or your CEO about a $4 million turnover problem, we expect that you've gotten their attention. And in this case, we certainly did. The organization decided to partner with the Work Institute to collect actionable intelligence and truly understand why those employees were leaving the organization. When the research began, improving communication was mentioned 30% of the time, and compensation was mentioned 12% of the time as the two most important suggestions for improvement with this health services organization. Over 4 years of research, continually collecting feedback from their exiting employees, collecting feedback from their current employees, and understanding what was happening at the organization, there were no exiting employees that cited communication 4 years later as an issue due to the changes that had taken place based off the feedback. And only 7% indicated compensation as an issue for why they left the organization. What happened ultimately was that turnover reduced by almost 5%, which calculated out to a savings of almost $1 million for this organization by reducing turnover. This is a great example of the success that a partner can have with the Work Institute. Well, you might be asking yourself, okay, Mark, well, what specifically took place? What were some of the key things that happened that drove change in this situation, and how I may be able to drive change ultimately at my own organization? The keys to remember in workforce research are these 6 bullet points you see here. The first is apply the proven research principles that I keep mentioning. Now, we're going to see those specifically here on our next slide. The second thing is, how are we communicating properly ahead of time to the targeted population that we'll be speaking with? For example, if it's your exit interviews, how are we contacting people prior to that conversation to set the expectation that we'll be contacting them and build credibility around the partnership that you and the Work Institute have entered to collect their information, and explaining how important it is that we ultimately hear about their employment experience. We also want to properly design a questionnaire. The mixed method approach is vital, combining both your qualitative and quantitative parts of your research. I'm going to show you a sample question here in just a minute as well. What else is important is having the resources to execute that research. Internally, it can be very difficult for you all to collect the type of research that you need, compile that research into reports so you can understand the trending data or understand these verbatim comments that are taking place. And that's where the reporting and analysis come in. If you have the proper reporting and analysis in your workforce research, you really start to find those answers and the solutions that you need to reducing turnover and increasing engagement at your organization. But lastly, and most importantly, you have to be ready to take action. We have seen in the past where an organization will get this great feedback with very clear examples of what can take place to improve the workplace, but they're not ready to take action. And so ultimately, what good is that data that has been collected? So we encourage you to ask yourself, am I ready to take action? Is my organization ready to take action to improve your workplace? So let's look at some of these research principles and what we found to be effective over the years. You see this 7 to 10 open-ended questions, and 7 to 10 open-ended topics is really a way you can look at that. Within each of those topics, we have the qualitative side, where we're following up asking why with this double probing for specificity. What that means is that we're seeking out actionable feedback from the responses that your employees have given us. Now, we start this actually with a rating type question in order to give you the quantitative part of your research as well. Now, within these 7 to 10 open-ended questions or open-ended topics, that conversation is typically 12 to 15 minutes long. So, Mark, why would the conversation be 12 to 15 minutes? Well, our research shows us that feedback fatigue is real after that 15-minute mark. We've all been there before. You're taking a survey or you're conducting an interview, and you ultimately just start pencil whipping or just answering the questions quickly to complete the interview. We don't want that to happen with the interviews we're conducting for you. So this 12 to 15 minutes really optimizes the ability for them to share actionable details. It's going to increase your response rate, but it's also not going to keep them on the phone all afternoon in order to discourage them from actually sharing the type of feedback we're looking for. Now, within our phone models, we found that 6 outbound calls per employee or per former employee optimize this response rate as well. Now, the Work Institute's average response rate last year on exit interviews was roughly 63% using this phone model. By varying call times every 3 to 5 days, leaving voicemails, giving them callback numbers, allowing them to schedule interviews with us, all of these things are going to help drive your response rate. Now, with current employee initiatives, we may use a web-type survey where each employee has a unique login per user. What this unique login does is it prevents your link from being able to be filled out by anyone under the sun. If you have a link that everyone goes to the same link to complete your interview, what's to stop that link from getting out to the general public or to a spouse or to a friend or to Facebook or to Twitter, and ultimately your data has been compromised. When we have a unique login per user, that helps protect the validity of your data. Now, in many situations, too, we will follow up these web interviews with phone calls for people that don't complete the web portion. Again, making these 6 calls and helping to drive your response rate higher. It's also going to be important that there's a behavioral interviewer on the other end of the line, or that your web model is built off of a behavioral type conversation. This is where that probing comes in and really gets the detail that you're looking for. And then, as many people already know, the external third party is really important anytime you're collecting research. A statistic that we've seen is roughly 40% of the reasons for leaving will change between an internal and an external conversation. So it's important, in order to get the confidence with your employees and really get the actionability from that conversation, to use an unbiased third party. So let's take a look at one of these questions of the sample. So on a scale of excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor, how would you rate Company X as an employer? As you see, we're starting out there with the rating question in order to get that specific response. Now, based on what they tell us, we're going to follow up accordingly. If they were to tell us excellent, fair, or poor, our first follow-up is why. Then we're probing for specificity for up to 4 responses, and then asking which of those 4 is the most important. One really interesting statistic is that 31% of the time, that second, third, or fourth reason given as to why they rated that way is noted as most important. It goes back to how vital it is to have this open-ended type conversation and probe for more specificity. Now, if your employee responds with very good or good, we're going to ask them why, but then also ask what would it take to earn an excellent rating. Oftentimes, there's only 1 or 2 key things that you could change in order to get that excellent type of response. And that's really great feedback for you all to use when you're implementing change. So you see here, we have the quantitative beginning and the qualitative, and that mixed method approach is what's going to allow you to get the best of both worlds from your employee feedback. Now let's take a look at what that feedback actually will look like here within your reporting system. So I'm actually going to jump over to our web browser here and show you all a brief glimpse into our Navigator reporting tool. Now, each person is going to have their unique login. So as you come in here, you're able to pull up your unique login and come into our reporting system. Now, within this reporting system, you're going to have high-level reports. You're going to have very specific reports that you can find. But here's a good example of a rating supervisor report, where you're looking at your excellence, your fair pours, and looking at your percentages as they track over time. Or perhaps you're looking at the rating of employer report. Another good example of a report that you can pull, say you've saved this for Jerry in this example, to see better examples of other specific questions that he would want. Rating of employer. You're looking at reasons for leaving over the last 6 months. Rating of supervisor. And all of these reports are updating in real time for you to be able to come in and get a brief snapshot of your data. Now we also provide you summary reporting to where you can go into your specific reports that have already been built, and you can pull up a summary of all of the research that's been conducted at your organization thus far. Now this summary report is going to give you the ability to see high-level things like response rates, cost of turnover, what a reduction in turnover would provide, what type of compliance issues are coming up in your feedback. But it will also tell you things like length of service by gender, age group, or quarter. We'll dig into your top 5 reasons for leaving. We'll also show you more specifically the sub-reasons. So in this example, you see personal as the main reason for leaving. Well, what does personal mean? And here you start to really drill down into those subcategories. Maybe it's school, maybe it's location, maybe it's pregnancy or elder care issues. Through the Work Institute's mixed method approach, we get down into the real, true detail of your employee's response. Now, as I come back to our presentation here, we're going to jump back over to our PowerPoint. I'm going to move you through a couple other quick slides here. And this is where, let me share this for us. I believe I'm actually hiding this from you. Now we want to talk about taking action. So in order to take action on your information, we need to locate the areas of success and the areas of opportunity. We need to celebrate the success. You're going to get great feedback, for example, on a supervisor. But with those areas of opportunity, we want to focus on, okay, what can we change immediately? What's the low-hanging fruit? And then what needs further investigation? Some of these fundamental changes that may need to take place, we need a lot of data to support that. So we may need to collect more information and further investigate what's happening. We're going to make commitments and follow through. We're going to track your progress, measuring results, and then communicating the success internally of the research back to your leadership. In order to talk about the reduction in cost of turnover or the reduction in a specific reason for leaving, we need to communicate that success so your leadership knows exactly what type of impact this research is having. Now, as far as pricing goes, the Work Institute keeps it very simple. We only have 2 parts, a one-time implementation and a per-record cost. And then you see here that rather than having monthly fees, or we updated our technology fees or specific consulting type fees, we only have 2 parts. So it allows your accounts payable group and you all as primary contacts to feel very comfortable knowing exactly what your bills will look like and avoiding any type of headache in this research. As far as implementation goes, there are 3 key parts. We're going to partner with you on approving a questionnaire for your research project. We're going to provide a data file template in order for you to build the data file of employee demographic data, name, phone number, department, facility, performance rating, those types of things. And then we're also going to provide you a communication template. As I mentioned earlier, how do we communicate this study to your employees in order to help drive that response rate? Now, those 3 key implementation milestones typically take anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, ultimately from the agreement being signed to the launch of your project. It takes 2 weeks for these 3 things you see here for you all internally to get approved and back to us, and roughly another 2 weeks for the Work Institute to design your research and be off and running. That concludes our quick 30 minutes that we've spent together today. If there are any questions specifically, again, please provide those over in our chat area, and I'm happy to get to those while we're on the call. For others, if you want to contact me directly, I've also given you our information here. You see my email address at the bottom, as well as some call-in numbers in order to have more direct contact and get your specific requests answered. Again, I'm glad you decided to spend part of your Friday with us here at the Work Institute. I hope this gave you some best practices and some insight into our partnership and the potential of uncovering actionable feedback and reducing turnover at your organization. Thanks again to everyone, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation. This concludes today's event. You may now disconnect your line. Presenters, one moment.
Thank you.